So, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about mRNA vaccines. What are they? What is mRNA? And how do these vaccines work? Now, before we really talk about mRNA and mRNA vaccines, I do want to talk a little bit about the immune system. So, how your immune system works is that when you are exposed to a foreign organism like a virus or a bacteria, your immune system is going to fight it off. And when you think of your immune system, what you're really thinking of are two very particular types of cells called T cells and B cells. Now, these two cells, they kind of work together, but what they're going after is very different, and how they work is very different. So, B cells recognize free floating viruses or bacteria. And what that means is that if you have a virus that is floating in your blood plasma or a virus that's floating in your lymphatic fluid, the B cell will recognize that virus and then it will make antibodies. So B cells are responsible for antibody production. Those antibodies do two things. They're going to go find that free floating virus and they're going to bind to it. And by binding to that virus, it prevents the virus from being able to infect a body cell. The other thing that antibody does is when it binds to the virus, it's basically flagging that virus for destruction. So you have other body cells that will see that antibody and viral combination and know, oh, this has been flagged. We need to get rid of this. So that is what antibodies are doing. And again, your B cells are making the antibodies. The other kind of immune system cell you have is a type of cell called T cells. And T cells work a little different. T cells are going to kill any body cell that has been infected by a virus. So they're not going after free floating viruses. They're not producing antibodies. Instead, when they see a body cell that's been infected, a T cell will actually kill that body cell. And the reason for that is because when a virus gets into a body cell, the whole goal of viruses is they just want to replicate. And they will hijack a body cell's machinery and cause that cell to produce more viruses. So the role of a T cell is to kill off that body cell before it ends up producing more viruses. Okay, so B cells and T cells, they're both part of the immune system. They work together. B cells are going after free floating viruses. T cells are going after body cells that have already been infected with that virus. Now, these two cells, however, are similar in that when they are activated, both of these cells create a type of cell called a memory cell. And memory cells are created during this primary exposure. So that means the very first time you see that particular virus. The B cells make antibodies, the T cells are going to kill off any body cell that's been infected, but both of them create memory cells. And these are exactly what they sound like they are. These are cells that have a memory. They remember that particular virus and they hang around in your body for years and years. And these memory cells are extremely specific. So they remember that very particular virus that got in your body. So that means that if you're exposed to that exact same virus again, those memory cells jump into action so fast that you don't even know you've been exposed. You don't have any symptoms. Your body fights it off so quickly. And so one thing I want to point out is that what's important to remember about your immune system is that it does exhibit specificity. Your B cells, your T cells, your memory cells, these are all very specific to a very particular virus. Okay, so an example might be, if you're infected with the PlayStation 4 virus, if that virus were to get into your body, you have B cells and T cells that will fight it off, very particular ones that only recognize the PlayStation 4 virus, and in the process, they make memory to that. So the next time the PlayStation 4 virus gets in your body, those memory cells fight it off. Now, if you're infected with the Xbox virus, those PlayStation 4 memory cells are not going to do you any good. You have other B cells and T cells that will recognize the Xbox virus, and they'll fight that off, and in the process, they will make Xbox memory cells. So I hope that makes sense. Your immune system cells are incredibly specific. Now, you have B cells and T cells that hang around in your body and they're never activated because you are never infected with that particular virus or bacteria that they would recognize. Okay? So when we talk about your immune system and we talk about these memory cells, this is actually what's called the primary and the secondary immune response. So the primary immune response is the very first time you are exposed to a virus. So the first time that virus gets into your body, it takes a little while for your T cells and your B cells to ramp up and become activated and start pumping out antibodies. And so you're going to feel bad. You'll feel bad for about 7 to 10 days while your body is fighting off that infection. That's your primary response. But remember, in this process, you make memory, very specific memory cells, so that the second time you are exposed to the exact same virus, those memory cells jump into action so fast, they pump out antibodies at such high rates that you might not even know you've been exposed. You'll have no symptoms. You may not feel bad at all. And that is the secondary response. So this is a great graphic. This is showing you the primary and secondary immune response. So you can see these red lines here. And what we're looking at is from time of exposure here. This is on the x-axis. And on the y-axis, this is showing us the amount of antibodies that are being generated during these exposures. So you can see at time 0, this would be our primary exposure. First time you're exposed, notice that the antibody levels do not even begin to rise until about day 6. This is because it takes a while for your B cells and your T cells to really get activated. It takes a while for your B cells to start pumping out antibodies. Notice antibody levels don't peak until between 2 and 3 weeks. This is why it takes about 7 to 10 days for you to get over even just a common cold, because it takes a while for those antibody levels to rise and for you to fight off that infection. Now notice over here, this is showing you the secondary immune response. So the second time you are exposed to the exact same virus, we'll look at time 0 again. Again, if we follow this red line, notice that immediately antibody production begins. Within hours, antibody production will begin. And notice that the level of antibodies, not only is it they're being produced faster, but you're also producing a lot more of them. So you produce significantly greater numbers of antibodies during the secondary immune response. I also want you to notice what happens in terms of the antibody level after exposure. Antibody levels stay elevated after exposure, whereas during that primary response, they drop off relatively quickly. Secondary response, antibody levels stay high. That is the whole reason why we have vaccines. So let's talk a little bit about vaccines. Traditional vaccines that you've probably had are one of 3 kinds. We have killed viruses. So these are viruses that are completely dead. They've been killed with chemicals or heat, and those are injected into your body. There are live attenuated viruses. These are viruses that haven't really been killed, but they're weakened viruses. They're deactivated, so you can't get sick from them. And then there's even subunits. Instead of giving the whole virus, this is just a little fragment of it that your body would recognize and fight off. The whole point of vaccines is to initiate this primary immune response. It's so that your B cells and your T cells can recognize this particular virus, and in the process, they generate memory. If you're vaccinated and you're exposed to that particular virus, your memory cells will fight it off and you have no symptoms. You don't even know that you were exposed. So most of the vaccines that you have gotten, like flu and chickenpox and MMR, they're one of those 3 types that I have listed up here. But now we have mRNA. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what is mRNA and how is the mRNA vaccine different from one of these three that we're used to. So mRNA stands for messenger RNA. This is something that we have in all of our cells. It is RNA that's complementary to the DNA in a gene. So mRNA is actually created from your DNA. That mRNA is like a code. And the whole role of mRNA is that it codes for proteins. Now, you have lots of proteins in your body. Hemoglobin is a protein. Enzymes are proteins. Antibodies are proteins. So this is how in your body you create all the proteins that you have. It is through this mRNA that you are making those. This is a process that's called transcription and translation. So you may remember that from general biology. So how does mRNA code for a protein? It needs the help of ribosomes. Remember, ribosomes are an organelle that we find in the cell. A ribosome will zip along the mRNA and it will read the code and translate it into an amino acid. Many amino acids strung together will make a protein. Remember, proteins are macromolecules and they are made of amino acids. So let me show you a picture of this process. Again, this is the process that we call transcription and translation. So in this image, we can see in blue up here, this is the nucleus of a cell. You can see that DNA, that double helix in here in the nucleus. And what's happening is the DNA is transcribing mRNA. Okay, so this is the process of transcription. The mRNA gets transcribed from your DNA. I always think of DNA as sort of like the instruction manual for your cells. So it's being transcribed and it then leaves the nucleus. Now, one thing that I want to point out is that mRNA can leave the nucleus, but it cannot get back into the nucleus. Okay, so it's transcribed from your DNA and it leaves the nucleus. Then it finds a ribosome, and the ribosome will zip down that mRNA and it will read those subunits on the mRNA. 3 subunits create what's called a codon, which will code for a single amino acid. And that amino acid chain will grow as the ribosome moves down the mRNA. And again, this is going to produce a chain of amino acids, which we know as a protein. So again, this is the process of transcription, transcribing mRNA from DNA, and translation, which is reading the mRNA, the ribosome reading that mRNA and creating the protein. So now that you know a little bit about mRNA, how do mRNA vaccines actually work? What's happening? So the mRNA that is in the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine codes for a protein called the spike protein. This is a protein that is very specific to the coronavirus. The virus actually uses this spike protein to be able to get into your cells. So when you're injected with the mRNA vaccine, that mRNA is able to get into your cells and it finds a ribosome. The ribosome reads, it zips down the mRNA and creates a protein. And in this case, what it's coding for is the spike protein. Your cells then take that spike protein and put it on their plasma membrane, so on the surface. And that's how your immune system, your B cells and your T cells, are able to see the spike protein and something that doesn't belong and how they're able to be activated. So instead of injecting you with a dead or a weakened virus, injecting the mRNA and causing your own cells to create the spike protein is how we're alerting our immune system and how we're priming our immune system. So now our immune system sees the spike protein, it's activated, and remember, that's our primary response. And during that primary response, our body is going to recognize that spike protein, and it's also going to create memory to it. So that if we are infected with the live coronavirus, our memory cells recognize that spike protein on the actual coronavirus and fight it off so that you don't have any symptoms. So this is an image from the Mayo Foundation that shows you here. You can see the spike protein on the surface of the coronavirus. mRNA with instructions for making that particular protein has been developed in the lab and put into the vaccine. Now, mRNA inherently is incredibly unstable. It breaks down very quickly in the body. So the vaccine, this is why it has to be kept at incredibly cold temperatures, but also they had to develop this lipid nanoparticle to put the mRNA in so that it could survive long enough to get into your body cells. So it gets into your body cells. So you can see here the mRNA is entering into a human body cell. It finds a ribosome, just like we saw with translation. It finds that ribosome, the ribosome zips down it, and it creates the spike protein. Your body cell then takes that spike protein and puts it on its surface. This is how your immune system knows, hey, that doesn't belong. We need to fight that off. And your immune system ramps up. In the process, you're going to create memory cells. And so you can see here, if you are actually infected with the coronavirus, which does have that spike protein on it, your memory cells ramp up so fast and you produce huge numbers of antibodies. You can see these little yellow structures. These are the antibodies. And you fight it off so fast that you don't even know you were sick. So that's that secondary immune response. Now this image is actually showing you, this is just an artist rendering of the coronavirus, and you can see those spike proteins on the surface of the virus. Now, these are actually, this is the foreign antigen that's on the surface that your body would recognize as foreign. And so this is what your body is producing. This is the protein or the foreign antigen, that spike protein. So there's a couple things that I want to point out. When someone is vaccinated, whether you're getting an mRNA vaccine or whether you're getting a live attenuated virus, getting a vaccine does not mean that you will never be exposed to the virus, because you can be exposed to the virus. When you get a vaccine, it does not mean that the virus can't get into your body, because it can. It can still infect you and get into your body. What it does mean is that now you've already primed your immune system. You've already made memory if you've had the vaccine. So now your body can just fight it off much more efficiently, much faster than if you didn't have the vaccine. In fact, usually it's so fast that you don't even know you were exposed. Now, I will say that if you are vaccinated and you have symptoms of COVID, it is possible that you can give it to someone else. No vaccine on the market is 100% effective. The COVID vaccines are the most effective vaccines that we have on the market. Their efficacy is around 90%. And 90% isn't bad. Just because it's not 100% doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. But I do want you to know that even if you're vaccinated, if you do have symptoms, then you can give it to someone else. Okay, we're not sure quite yet about asymptomatic transmission. So that is just a little bit about mRNA vaccines, how they work, what's the science behind them. Hopefully that is helpful so that you can understand a little about the immune system and a little bit about how these vaccines work.